All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here. And let me begin by asking, can everyone hear loud and clear at the back of the room? All right, good. Let me begin by welcoming you. I am County Supervisor Joe Simitian. I represent the 5th Supervisorial District, which includes all or part of 8 cities here in Santa Clara County: Palo Alto, Los Altos Hills, Mountain View, Cupertino, Saratoga, and portions of Sunnyvale and portions of San Jose as well. We have a protocol here, which is that we always start this meeting promptly 5 minutes late, so we have begun at 7:05. That is to give you all time to find parking spaces, make your way in, and we will wrap up on a timely basis at or before 9 o'clock. So thanks again for attending. This is our third, I would call it annual public meeting, but we, after setting it up in the fall of 2015 and 2016, wanted to delay our 2017 meeting until the first month or two of this year because there were some developments at Lehigh that we thought it might be helpful to take stock of before we had this meeting. I think a little background might be helpful for those of you who are new to this conversation. And let me just say, I came back to the Board of Supervisors in the year 2013. I had served from 1997 to the year 2000, went off to the state legislature, and then came back after a dozen years away. I mention that because prior to my return to the Board of Supervisors, the board took 2 actions that I think are probably relevant to tonight's conversation as we talk a little bit about what's happening at Lehi and who is involved in oversight and regulation. In 2011, the County Board of Supervisors made a determination on what's called vested rights. And that was a determination about where mining could occur on the existing property without a use permit, as distinct from where a use permit would be required. So about 2,200 of the 3,500 acre property is what's called vested for mining activities. And so proposals to mine outside that vested area require a use permit from the county. So the vested rights issue was one that was decided back in 2011. And if it seems like I'm emphasizing that that was made by the Board of Supervisors before I came back, that's because I am emphasizing that point tonight. In 2012, also before I returned to the Board of Supervisors approved an amendment to the Quarry's Reclamation Plan. And the Reclamation Plan encompasses a little more than a third of the 3,500 acres, and it outlines the plan and timing for how the site will be restored at the conclusion of mining. And changes to the existing mining footprint that are within the vested area would probably require an amendment to the Reclamation Plan. So 2 important decisions in 2011 and 2012 made by the 5-member Board of Supervisors, one with respect to vested rights and one with respect to the issue of a reclamation plan. Now, both of those were subject to judicial review, and in both cases the county ultimately prevailed. So the vested rights and the reclamation plan are in place as approved by the Board of Supervisors back in 2011 and 2012. Now, as I mentioned, I was sworn in then in January 2013, having returned to the Board of Supervisors, and as I said to my staff then, look, Lehi is an issue that will be with us on the first day we open the office, and it is an issue that will be with us on the last day as we walk out the door and turn out the lights. Because this is a challenging environment. When you've got a major operation like this, cheek by jowl with residential setting, you just know there are going to be challenges along the way. So after spending some time reviewing the status of the property and the activities on the property, I approached our county planning staff with a handful of requests that I thought might help us improve our game. And I think taken together, they have. Back in, I guess, 2014, after about a year on the job, this go around, I asked the county if we could, number one, step up our on-site presence at Lehi. And the question I asked at the time was, how often do we actually have somebody from the county staff up on the property? The answer was a couple times a year. I thought that was less than adequate and said, could we get somebody up there probably more like once a month? And so the staff said, sure, we can make that happen. And today, that's the expectation, that somebody will be on the site at least once a month walking around, taking a look to see what's going on, in part because we should know, in my judgment, and in part because when we hear from folks in the community about what's going on, we should be able to speak from current and accurate knowledge about what's happening on the property. Second thing I asked was that we get the multiplicity of agencies who are responsible for regulation and oversight together at least twice a year. And one of the challenges that we'll be talking about tonight is that there are so many, the reason you see so many smiling faces up here, or let me try that again. The reason you see so many smiling faces up here is because there are so many different governmental agencies at the federal, state, and local level, including the county, that share responsibility for regulation. And that's a challenge, frankly. So one of the things that we wanted to do, or at least that I thought would be helpful, was could we get everybody together around the same table at least a couple of times a year to share information so that the left hand and the right hand, or the octopus hands that we've got up here, would all not only know what one another were doing, but they would do it in collaboration with one another to make sure that all of the things that should be done in terms of regulatory oversight were in fact being done. And then the third thing I asked for was that we actually have a report out of those meetings and an opportunity for the community to engage at least once a year. So that's why, starting back in 2015 and then 2016, and this is the sort of 2017/early 18 meeting, after the end of each year when there have been these meetings and these opportunities for people to share information, I wanted to make sure that the information both got shared with the public, but also that if there were unanswered questions, the public had a chance to ask those questions and get answers directly from the folks who are responsible for the oversight and the regulation. So as I say, this is the third, I'll call it almost annual public meeting for that purpose, and I want to thank you for being here tonight. I should mention that subsequent to those three actions, as we continue to try and stay on top of the situation at Lehigh in my office, I asked my office to review the conditions of approval that were applicable to Lehigh, just to make sure that everything was in conformance, working with our county counsel, our legal counsel's office. We did find that there was a long ago requirement for what's called a performance bond of $75,000 to be posted that somehow had just sort of slipped everybody's notice for a long, long time. And so we just picked up the phone and said, hey, can we get the bond back in place? And the bond is now back in place. After that, one of the things that we did based on the comments we got from folks in the community was simply to try and upgrade the county's website. We're always on the issue of Lehigh in specific. While there was a lot of information there that was available to the public, it could have been more user-friendly. Efforts have been made to make it more user-friendly so that you don't have to, have a Ouija board to figure out what it is you're looking for when you go online. And then probably the thing I should mention that I think I have found most helpful is that my office and I have a monthly call with the folks at Lehi to make sure that if they have information, they're sharing it with us, and that if we have information about what we're hearing from the community, we can pass that along to them. There's been a change in leadership and management at Lehigh recently, but Christina Loquist, who is from my office, who many of you know because you've worked with her, and I get on those calls. Usually Christina handles them. It has been with the president directly at Lehigh so that we know what's going on, or with somebody else in top management, and those calls continue to go on a monthly basis just to make sure that nothing slides or slips over a period of time. And then finally, these meetings, we did the first, as I said, in 2015. I asked people at the time, did you find it useful? Because we don't need to do this year after year if it wasn't something people found useful. People said they did, and so we have come back again in 2016 and now for this 2017-18 session. We got about 125, I think, at the first one, about 100 at the second one, and you can look around and do the counting for yourself tonight to see how many are here. But again, we thank you. So, having said all that, before we get started in earnest, I do want to recognize some elected officials who are here and thank them for being here. From the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District Board, we have Board President Jed Sear, and we have Open Space Director Pete Siemens. Gentlemen, if you'd raise your hands so people know who to accost when the meeting is over, thank you for being here. We also have Tom Pike from Congressman Ro Khanna's office. Thanks, Mr. Pike, and thank you to Congressman Khanna for sending you. Lisa Chung is here representing State Senator Jerry Hill. Thank you to the Senator for sending his staff as well. And I'm pretty sure that I saw Mayor Darcy Paul, along with Council Member Barry Chang and Council Member Rod Sinks. And thank you all three for being here, and thank you for sitting separately so we don't have a Brown Act violation. That's a helpful and important. That's a helpful and important consideration. Don't want anybody getting in any trouble. Did I miss any of the other elected officials who are in the room? Yes, and there's Councilmember Scharf. Thank you. Welcome. And now we're up to 4 here. So thank you for being here as well. And before I turn to our panel of experts, I also want to just give a quick thank you to the City of Cupertino, who for the 3rd time now has shared the space with us, made arrangements for us to be both streaming live and ultimately rebroadcast available on demand at the city's YouTube site. We will also have a tape of tonight's meeting on both the county's planning website as well as my own website in my office for Supervisor, Simitian.com. Now, here's how the evening will unfold. I've tried to stretch a little so anybody who is still looking for a parking space could finally make their way in. I think we're all here. We're going to start off by asking the panel to introduce themselves and just not only to tell us their names, but also to tell us what agency they're with, and briefly, keyword briefly, to indicate what your responsibility is with respect to the agency that you represent and the Lehigh property. Then I will ask some questions to get what I'll call a foundation of information. At this point, after having been through this exercise over the last few years, there are a series of issues and questions that come up repeatedly. So I'm just going to try and get those out up front and lay down a foundation of knowledge and understanding amongst us all. And then after what I hope will be no more than 30 minutes, we'll move into the portion of the evening where I'll ask the panel to address questions posed by the audience. And if you have a question, please write it down on a card. There should be a card at every single seat, and my staff will collect it from you. All you have to do is raise your hand, and either Christina or Gabe will simply walk by and pick up a card when the time comes. And if you need more cards, if there isn't another one close enough by, let us know. We can always give you another. And one of the things I should ask is, please write legibly. It will help me ask your question and organize the questions into bundles so that we can get through as many as possible. All right. Now, my understanding is that the interagency meeting that we just described took place this Tuesday. So we see nodding heads. Thank you. I was not in attendance, but I know my staff was, and understand that there's some progress on a number of fronts, so I know we're all looking forward to hearing that. Let me go ahead then and ask for introductions. We'll just start this way and work our way down. And again, if you give us your name, your title, your organization, and a brief description of what your role or responsibility is with respect to the Lehigh facility.
Thank you, Supervisor Simitian. My name is Sanjeev Kamboj, and I'm a manager in the engineering division of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. The Air District is responsible for regulating stationary sources of air pollution in the 9-county Bay Area region.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Giacometti. I am a supervising air quality specialist with the Compliance and Enforcement Division of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. My responsibility is I supervise the inspection staff along the peninsula, and that stretches as far south as the Cupertino area, which includes Lehi as well. So we're responsible for enforcing and confirming compliance with the regulations, both issued by the district, as well as we also have authority to oversee and govern the regulations issued by both the California Air Resources Board and the EPA.
And our next.
Good evening. I'm Lisa McCann. I'm Assistant Executive Officer of the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. Our agency protects water quality of San Francisco Bay and her watersheds and groundwater aquifers. And my role is to help direct all the programs and policies that we implement and serve as lead prosecutor for any enforcement proceedings for any violation of permits or regulations that we have authority over.
I'm Julie Macedo. I'm Senior Staff Counsel for the State Water Resources Control Board Office of Enforcement, so I represent LISA and the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. This is my third meeting, so I think we have a few of us with perfect attendance. I'm the person responsible for resolving Lehigh's water code violations and also interacting with EPA to resolve any violations under the consent decree among Lehigh, EPA, and the Water Board.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brett Calhoun, Associate Water Resources Specialist with the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Our main concern is we are a stakeholder and property owner downstream of the Lehi facility, and we have various flood control and water conveyance operations. And I also act as a subject matter expert on sediment and other issues for the county and sometimes the water board.
And before we go to the next panelist to introduce himself, could we just ask you to clarify that the Santa Clara Valley Water District is a separate governmental entity, distinct and separate from the Water Board? This is a subject that I know sometimes gets confused in the communications I have with folks in the public.
So the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board has jurisdiction over the water pollution in all of San Francisco Bay region, and the Santa Clara Valley Water District is actually a flood control and water supply agency with an arm of stewardship, and we only have authority over lands that we own. So if there is an issue that's outside of our jurisdiction that's brought to our attention, we reach out to our partners, either the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board or the County of Santa Clara. So we do not have any police or violation abilities. We just work with the others.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Rob Eastwood, County Planning Manager. A bit different. We do have police powers and land use authority. So the County Planning Office covers land use in the unincorporated areas. We're in Cupertino. A large unincorporated area starts a bit to the west of us, where Lehigh Quarries is operating. We oversee land use, permitting, use permits, development permits in our office, and more importantly, we implement SMARA, which is required by state law. And of course, we'll provide a bit more.
I'm sure just the 2 or 3 people in the room who don't know what SMARA is, could you tell them,
Sure,
please?
Absolutely. SMARA is an acronym for the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, and it does require that for all active mines that are extracting minerals in California, that there's an exit strategy, that there is a plan and a financial assurance in place that that mine, once it finishes extracting those minerals, is reclaimed to a state to which it's stable and there's a non-hazardous condition following mining.
And that's a state law, yes?
That is a state law.
But it is administered and the responsibility rests with the county, yes?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. And our next panelist?
Good evening. My name is Christopher Holm. I'm a planner in the County Planning Office, and I'm also the SMARA, or Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, the county program for that. I run the program for that, which means I inspect the quarry. We have regular inspections, and we have an annual inspection where we write a report and we send that to the state department, the Division of Mine Reclamation. And we also review the financial assurance cost estimate and make sure that the financial assurances, the bond that's in place, is sufficient for reclaiming the site.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Pianca, and I'm a lead deputy county counsel in the Office of the County Counsel. I'm assigned to the Planning and Development Department, and among other things, I advise the department as well as the county in general on legal matters relating to Lehigh.
Thank you. And our next panelist?
Good evening. My name is Rochelle Gaddy, and this is a first for me. This is my first time on the panel. I'm with the Department of Environmental Health, the Director of the Consumer Protection Division, and we administer the noise ordinance code in the unincorporated areas of the county, and we respond to all the complaints that come in regarding any noise concerns with Lehigh.
And just to be clear, that's the Department of Environmental Health for the County of Santa Clara?
Correct.
Great. And our final panelist?
Good evening. So I'm Jennifer, also with the County of Santa Clara Department of Environmental Health. I'm the program manager for the Hazardous Materials and Site Mitigation programs, and we are certified by Cali PA to implement 6 hazardous materials programs, collectively referred to as the Unified Program, as well as a couple of local ordinances related to hazardous materials.
Thank you all very much. I should mention that there are some other agencies and organizations who either could not be with us tonight or chose not to be with us tonight. The new federal administration means that there's been a little change in policy and practices, and so we did extend invitations to other agencies to be here tonight, but these are the agencies who could be with us, and we thank them for being with us because this makes for a long day for them just as it does for all of you. So we have folks from the county. I'm going to ask if you're on the panel and you're from the county, please raise your hand. Okay, so these are the county folks in different various. Then if you work for a state board or agency and you're at the table, would you please raise your hand? And then if you work for a federal board or agency, please raise your hand. If you work for an independent district, please raise your hand. Okay, now you get a little sense of what the challenge is in terms of stitching together the overlapping jurisdictions with not only these folks, but as I say, some folks who couldn't be with us here tonight. Let me begin by asking some questions. I do want to say, however, before I get started, there is no perfect date or time for a meeting. I've learned that over the years. Tonight, we have to acknowledge that we're on Lunar New Year's Eve, and I gather that posed a problem for some folks who might otherwise have hoped to be here. Regrets in that regard. That being said, as I mentioned earlier, we are taping tonight's meeting. It will be available both on the city's YouTube channel, on the county's planning channel or planning website, and on my own website at Supervisor, Simitian.org, and we will be happy to take questions. We did get, I think, some questions in advance from folks who couldn't be here tonight, and we appreciate that as well. Let me begin by asking the Bay Area Air Quality Management District representatives, when we got together in the fall of 2016, the Air District representatives mentioned that there was a rule anticipated for particulate matter, also known as dust, at commercial and industrial operations like Lehigh. Could you provide us with an update on the rule, please, and what its impact has been, if any?
So the update on the rule is that the rule is still has not been adopted. The rule it currently has gone through workshop and is anticipated to be adopted mid-April this year to go to the board for adoption this year. So
and who is promulgating this rule again? Just that wasn't a trick question. Just share with everybody. The rule is being considered by.
The rule is being considered by Bay Area Air Quality Management District.
Great.
So basically the rule is being considered by us for adoption. So the anticipation of this rule is to better regulate the fugitive dust emissions from various sources throughout the Bay Area. So the goal with this was to add additional requirements for sources with fugitive dust emissions. So again, it's anticipated to be adopted come mid-April, or go to the board for adoption in mid-April.
All right, mid-April. Thank you.
Yes.
Anything else? All right, then let me ask the Air Quality Management District as well. How is the district planning to reduce the risk from toxic air contaminant emissions going forward?
Okay, let me start by saying that the Air District's mission is to protect and improve public health, air quality, and the global climate. And to further that mission, the Air District adopted Regulation 11 Rule 18, reduction of risk from air toxic emissions at existing facilities. This rule was adopted in November of last year. So under this rule, all facilities found to have a cancer risk more than 10 in a million or a non-cancer risk greater than 1 would be required to reduce their facility-wide risk below 10 in a million and their non-cancer risk below 1 or install best available retrofit control technology for toxics, or TBART, on all significant sources of toxic emissions. And this is the most stringent rule of its kind in the whole nation. Under this rule, we'll be dropping the facility-wide risk reduction threshold from 100 in a million to 10 in a million. And this rule also uses the revised HRA guidelines that were adopted by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, in 2015. So these OEHA guidelines include age sensitivity factors for the protection of children, higher breathing rates, new exposure durations, The net result of all these changes is that the calculated risk will go up 2 to 5 times for the same level of emissions. In other words, emissions are not changing, but the calculated risk is going up. So this is a pretty stringent rule. We are dropping the...
Let me interrupt for just a second. I think that can be misunderstood, because what we just said was risk is going up, and I don't want to send 100 people out of the room thinking risk is going up. So I think what you are sharing with us is that the same level of emissions will now carry a higher risk level, which will then impose an additional burden on the operation to manage, mitigate, limit, reduce that risk?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
You're right. And also, in addition to that, we are dropping the threshold from 100 in a million to 10 in a million. This is in addition to the risk going up because of the HRA guideline changes.
And the timing again on this is?
The rule is already adopted, and we are going to implement this rule in 2 different phases. In phase 1, we are going to look at facilities that have the highest impact on public health, and Lehi is in phase 1, and phase 1 facilities will be evaluated this year and next year, and the phase 2 facilities after that. So we'll be looking at total of 400 facilities under this rule.
And just to be clear again, Lehi is one of those 400 facilities.
Yes.
The implementation is scheduled for the coming year, year and a half.
That's right.
And that means that whatever mitigation measures are required will in fact be imposed on the operations at Lehi.
No, let me clarify that.
Please.
The way it's going to work is, as part of 1118, we'll be doing health risk assessments for these facilities. Let's say, for example, for Lehi, we'll conduct a facility-wide health risk assessment, and if the facility-wide risk is more than the thresholds, then Lehi will be required to come up with a risk reduction plan. And once the district approves the risk reduction plan, Lehi has 5 years to implement those risk reduction measures.
Understood. Anything else you want to share with us before we go on to the next question?
Nope.
All right. Then let's go to the Water Board and ask the Water Board to remind us what water quality improvements have been made to the facility over the last few years. And can you let us know how the final treatment system is working? And you might share with those who don't know what the final treatment system is all about. And let's see if we can minimize the feedback somehow.
Yes, thank you. Over the last few years, we've been managing the Lehi's compliance with the various water quality permits that we have in place. And what I mean by that is we're ensuring that they are adequately protecting the creek and reducing the loads of selenium and other constituents that are coming off their site in their runoff. That has evolved to lead to them implementing a water treatment system that is much improved from the past approaches they've taken to preventing pollutants from discharging to the creek. And they also have done a lot of drainage controls and some reuse of water on site to minimize the amount of water that's discharged to the creek. I'll go ahead and tell you a few things I know about the treatment system, and then I'll let Julie, who's been involved in this project.
And before you do that, I want to get even more basic, and I apologize to those of you in the room who are subject matter experts and who may think that the basics are basic, but I think it's important to lay a foundation. We're talking about limestone at the quarry, is that right?
That's correct.
And when we talk about limestone as an ingredient and limestone that is quarried, limestone contains selenium?
Yes.
Any other chemicals?
When exposed to air, I believe.
When exposed to air. So the process of extracting the limestone raises this issue of selenium, and then the question is, how do we manage the selenium? Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and so that's what we're talking about, making sure it gets well managed at Lehi, among other issues. All right, let me ask you to continue then.
Thank you for clarifying that. The final treatment system was in place last November, December, and myself and our staff went out and visited the site and had the opportunity to see the system as well as to see some of the preliminary results from treatment. And it is, early data is showing that it is very effective at reducing the levels of selenium that have been discharged to the creek historically down to water quality standards. Those standards are set at levels that are protective are intended to be protective of wildlife and habitat. The treatment system also increased the capacity of water that could be treated. That's significant because with the big rains that we had the prior winter, they had a lot of runoff and overtopping of some of their ponds that were holding water and whatnot, and this provides the opportunity for them to make sure that their water does go through the treatment system, and more of the water that's generated that is in touch with that selenium that then can get carried into the environment runs through the treatment system and is removed before it's discharged to the creek. Let's see.
I think that's good. For those of you who are repeat attendees in this meeting, the water treatment system at Lehi is a topic of sort of big importance for both you and us. As you know, it came about in part because of the Sierra Club lawsuit, and the two main victories or achievements of that lawsuit were both the treatment system and then improvements to the creek that will be ongoing and looked at by the Army Corps of Engineers, the regional board, and then finally implemented with permission of those agencies pursuant to the Sierra Club's sort of wish list that was approved by the court. In terms of the treatment system, it targeted selenium, and it was instrumental in developing something that actually hadn't been used in the country. It actually, I think, was first tried in Canada, and we sort of pushed them to do it in a way that met certain levels. So to the extent that they had to develop this technology, as Lisa said, we went out in December, and it has a number of treatment trains, both reverse osmosis and biologic, which are just two different scientific methods to deal with that, to deal with the selenium coming off. If you're familiar with our permitting documents, the regional board placed Lehigh under a different permit and then issued a cease and desist order that expired when the final treatment system was operational. So as of October 1, 2017, that system was operational and is working, as Lisa said. And that's pursuant to the Sierra Club lawsuit, and then implementation now after the lawsuit has been by the regional board.
Let me ask you both if there are any, I'll call them remaining water quality concerns, and if so, what steps are being taken to address them?
There are. We're working with Lehigh, developing a permit for the waste management areas and the risks that those pose to groundwater discharges. So we want to make sure groundwater is well protected. The permit that I mentioned previously and that they've been operating under with the water treatment system is mostly treating the surface water discharges and stormwater runoff. So that'll be forthcoming. And we're still, there's some concerns about the effects on the creek from all the various flows and past loading. And so there's a creek restoration project that's in development now that hopefully is heading in a really good direction for some good restoration there, and we'll be involved in permitting that as well.
Great.
If you're familiar with the site, two of the, it's such a large site. One of the problems is not with the process wastewater or the water generated by the actual mining. It's the water that falls from the sky and then touches the sort of work that Lehigh does, because the ground is essentially open because of the mining, or what we call the east and west material storage areas. Have materials in them that could be affected by stormwater. So we worked with Lehigh to improve stormwater controls. And then as Lisa was mentioning in terms of the treatment system capacity increase, all of the potential runoff now gets treated before discharge, which is something that we really worked hard to do and is a big improvement. So as we go forward, I think the processes of Lehigh are much better controlled, and we understand that everything is being treated. And then in terms of stormwater, it's being treated and diverted in ways that prevent large loading of selenium to go to the creek.
And just again, to get down to the most basic level, you talked about rainwater, stormwater affecting materials. What does affecting materials mean?
It just means if the rain is falling from the sky and hits certain materials, such as the limestone or such as the process mining waste, it would then carry it to a surface water.
All right, thank you. That's a nice opportunity for me to segue to the water district and ask, I know from the folks I hear from in my district that a lot of folks are concerned about the possibility of contaminants, including selenium, getting into the groundwater and then getting into the drinking water potentially. What should members of the public know about that set of concerns?
Thank you, Supervisor. So the Water District has been involved with Lehigh prior to my starting in 1993. There was a 1989 report by the Water District and the USGS. So we've been active working on the subsurface and surface water issues up there. And we take and have taken for the last 30 years very seriously the water quality of our aquifers. That said, metals like selenium generally do not move readily through the soils. It's a characteristic of the metal. The creek is not expected, so the metals don't migrate to depth, and all the drinking water wells downstream of Lehi are drawing from the deeper aquifers, and that's what saved Santa Clara County during the fuel leak and solvent era too, is that we have this pancake geology, luckily, so our drinking water comes from deeper aquifers. So the thinner zone may have some selenium in it, but we're not drawing from it. And in addition, since we do have this long legacy of water quality concerns and managing the groundwater, the district has analyzed 10 years of data from water supply wells within 4 miles of the quarry. From 2007 to 2016, there's no indication of elevated selenium, mercury, or arsenic in deep drinking water aquifers near the quarry.
All right. Then let me also raise this issue again of sort of overlapping jurisdiction between the Water District and the Regional Board, which I think can be confusing to folks. Is there an easy way for the public to understand who they can go to with which concerns, so that if anybody here has an issue, they know who to go to and hopefully avoid having somebody do that to them in the conversation, metaphorically, if not physically? And I guess while you're at it, if you could explain why the district doesn't cite or issue violations at Lehigh like the Regional Board does, that might be helpful to people who have those questions as well.
Okay, so hypothetically, if somebody along Permanente Creek were to say, we're seeing a discharge of something of color or some other thing issue, we have the Water District has a 24-hour pollution prevention hotline, which is 1-888-510-5151.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? A little slower.
The phone number or the 24 hours?
The phone number.
1-888-510-5151.
And it would be appropriate to call that for what purpose again?
Pollution prevention and hazardous materials releases to creeks.
Okay.
So what will happen is that will send somebody to a voicemail system that alerts one of 4 on-call staff members who are trained in hazardous materials, and we will triage the situation. So let's say it was right at the bridge underneath Lehi. We would mobilize, go take a look at it, and then we would contact our partner agencies, usually on Monday, and if there was a significant issue of diminished water quality, we will call the Fish and Game Department. We will call the Regional Board hotline, and then a case would take place. We have a history of working with the District Attorney's Office in Santa Clara County on cases on our property, and we triage out cases that are not on our property. So I think that's an important point, is the Water District does not have jurisdiction over all the creeks in the county. In fact, on Upper Penitencia Creek, we don't have jurisdiction until further down the hill below Rancho San Antonio Park. So, all we do in that situation is consult with the others and notify if we get a hotline call.
And would the board representatives like to share anything else on the distinction or the difference between the two organizations and their mission and who to call for what or contact for what?
Yes, thank you. We have a complaint line as well. I don't know the phone number, but it's also online, but we could get that to you. The way I usually answer that question is we regulate the water in its environment, not its after it's been extracted for another use by somebody who's providing it, such as drinking water. So we are protecting it when the water from Lehigh as it goes into the creek and into the groundwater. If anybody then has a permit or rights or a reason to be removing the water from the environment for another use, which is available to many people, in the case of drinking water, for example, then if your question is about what's in my drinking water, is it safe, then that would be the water provider and or the water district. But if it's about something seems to be getting from somewhere that doesn't look right into the environment, I can see this pollution in the creek, then that is likely to be us, although they do have hazardous materials specialists who
All right, thank you. Let me turn now to county planning and ask a couple of questions again that I get fairly frequently and my office fields fairly frequently. We do hear from folks who are wondering, how long does Lehigh's permit last?
Lehigh has a reclamation plan, and that is part of the vested quarry. And in that plan, which is on our website, by the way, it shows a chart and a map that show the phases for when Lehigh needs to reclaim the quarry. And the phases are broken up into 3. And those phases are dependent on the market and how fast they can mine and sell the material. And more time can be applied to the phases based on the need for the county to monitor and look after the maintenance so that the site can be revegetated and reclaimed.
I'm going to ask you if you could put some numbers around that.
Sure. The first 2 phases are 5 years, and the last one is 8 years, if I recall. And again, those are soft deadlines. If for some reason Lehigh needed to extend that much beyond, then it may be contemplated that they would need to get a reclamation plan amendment.
Which means they'd have to come to who and ask for what?
Which means they would come to the county, and this would only be extenuating circumstances. Their reclamation plan covers the current quarry pit and all the reclamation that needs to happen there. So it depends on the market and how quickly they can reclaim the ground.
And if they come to the county, whose permission do they need? Is that a staff level decision, or is that a decision that goes to the Board of Supervisors?
So if it's a major reclamation plan amendment, that would go to the County Planning Commission. And if it's a minor reclamation plan amendment, that would go to the zoning administrator. And those, the difference between the two is in our zoning ordinance. So we can show you that after.
And I'm going to ask, and I'm sorry to keep putting you on the spot, but if you need to phone a friend, either left or right, you certainly can. And are those appealable to the Board of Supervisors? I just think it's important for people here to know where the buck stops.
Yes, those decisions are appealable to the Board of Supervisors.
All right, thank you. I think that's helpful. And then let me just ask, the other question that has come up fairly frequently is whether or not Lehigh will dig a second quarry pit, and if so, when that will happen.
So Lehigh, a little history, Lehigh submitted plans for a new quarry pit to the south of the existing quarry pit. That happened around 8 years ago, and the plans were withdrawn and they backed out of that idea about a year afterward. And currently there are no plans, they have not submitted any plans for a new pit, and if that ever does happen, then that would require a reclamation plan amendment for sure. And for the areas of a new potential pit that are outside the vested areas, that would require a use permit as well. And both of those would trigger public hearing, and the county would notify the public.
And my understanding is that at various times we've heard that there might be a request for a new pit in the vested area. that there might be a request for a pit in the area that is not vested, and that there might or might not even be a request going forward. Is that sort of the ambiguous state of affairs?
I mean, anything could happen. If it's proposed in the vested area, then it would, at a minimum, require a reclamation plan amendment with a public hearing and that whole procedure. And if any part of it is outside of the vested area, that would require a use permit, which is the same thing. It would require a public hearing.
Thank you. Let me ask county planning, does the county have any oversight when it comes to water pollution? And if so, what is the county's involvement on water pollution?
Sure. We do, as we have general land use oversight, and we also enforce SMARA, which is this, again, the California State Surface Mining and Reclamation Act. SMARA guidelines and the rules include enforcement of the Porter Cologne Act, which is for water quality. So if there's a water quality issue, it's also, if there's a violation, then it would also be a SMARA violation. And there are two major items that are coming right now that deal with water quality. The first is the water treatment facility that the Lehigh applied for a building permit and was issued a building permit to construct it. It's currently being constructed, and the estimate is the end of April is when they'll start testing it. That's just an estimate for now. And the other item dealing with water quality is the Permanente Creek Restoration Project. That requires a grading permit, and they applied for a grading permit. It's currently being reviewed for completeness.
All right. Let me turn to County Counsel, and County Counsel is the legal counsel for our county government. And if you've been following these issues for a while, I'm sure many of you recall that there have been a number of lawsuits filed over the past several years, and they've at various stages have worked their way through the system. Let me ask County Counsel to just sort of give us a brief update or capsule summary of sort of where these things stand.
Certainly, it could be very short. There were two pieces of litigation that were filed against the county's vested rights determination in 2011 and the county's approval of the Reclamation Plan amendment and certification in 2012. And I believe last year I reported that the vested rights determination litigation had been completed. And as Supervisor Simitian mentioned in his introductory comments, the court ruled in favor of the county's determination. The remaining piece of litigation that was still outstanding at last year's meeting related to the board's approval of the Reclamation Plan amendment and certification of the EIR. That litigation is also complete. And the court, in that case as well, upheld the board's determination.
Thank you. And let me just clarify a couple of things, and also, just to be very clear, offer my own point of view, which is my own point of view. So we've had these two court cases. The county was sued in both cases, and ultimately, through the full appeal process, the county prevailed, and the courts ruled that the county acted legally in the exercise of its authority and jurisdiction. Is that a fair summary?
Correct.
Okay. Having said that, that is not a determination as to whether or not the county or the Board of Supervisors made a good policy decision. That's a determination that the county and the Board of Supervisors acted within their legal authority.
Correct.
Okay. Then I should also say, and I've said this at previous meetings like this, it was interesting to me to come back to the Board of Supervisors, as I mentioned, after being in Sacramento for 12 years. And I started getting phone calls from friends and colleagues in local government who said, "We're thinking of suing you. Would that make you mad?" And I said, no, it wouldn't, for a variety of reasons. First, I certainly don't take it personally, because these are decisions that were made prior to my return to the Board of Supervisors. Having said that, as the sitting supervisor, I also took the view that while I never want to encourage the expenditure of public funds for one agency to sue another agency, that's, I think, disconcerting to people. If people think they have a legitimate, good faith difference of opinion about whether or not a government agency or department or jurisdiction has done its job, then that's why we have a court system. So if somebody wants to go to court and have that legal determination made, I not only am okay with that, I think to some extent it's frankly helpful to resolve the matter, and in this case, the matters have been resolved. The one case, of course, that you did not mention, that was mentioned earlier in passing, was the Sierra Club litigation, which did result in a settlement decree, if I remember correctly, or a settlement agreement?
Correct.
And that settlement agreement ended up imposing a number of requirements on Lehi, which requirements are in the process of being addressed, yes?
That is correct, and the county was not a party to the Sierra Club litigation.
You can always count on our county council to say the party was not a party to that, the county was not a party to that litigation. So duly noted. All right. Let me go back to county council and ask if you could perhaps explain a little more fully what a vested right is and how the board's prior vested rights determination affects the county's permitting of an expanded operation if and when we get an application. Because we toss this term around quite a bit, vested rights, and I think people understandably want to know, well, okay, I know that's the term you use, but what does that really mean? If somebody walks in the door from Lehi and says, we're now ready to go forward with a new pit, what does this vested or not vested distinction mean, and why is it relevant or important?
It's relevant with respect to permitting. So at a very high level, local zoning ordinances ordinarily exempt out or grandfather legal non-conforming land uses. And so under the general rule, if you're a legal non-conforming land use, you acquire a vested right to continue that operation. So with respect to the portions of Lehigh's property that was determined vested, that is a determination that they have a legal right to continue operating. They began operating prior to any county requirements or zoning ordinance requirements to operate with a use permit. So for those vested parcels, if they operate today, there's no requirement that a use permit be obtained from our county. Under our county zoning ordinance today, quarrying and mining operations require a use permit. For those non-vested parcels, they weren't operating in a quarrying or mining capacity, and they're not grandfathered in, and therefore require a use permit before commencement of an operation. And as Chris mentioned, would also require a reclamation plan or an amendment to the existing reclamation plan.
Thank you. I'm going to try and grossly oversimplify if I can, and you tell me if I still got it right even though I grossly oversimplified. If it's not vested, the Board of Supervisors has a whole lot more say-so than if it is vested, the territory in which someone applies.
Correct. Okay.
I told you I was going to grossly oversimplify. Also for County Council, it's my understanding that the county is in negotiations for a compliance agreement with Lehi to address the noise issues from the cement plant. Can you tell us the status of that and what that means, what a compliance agreement is, and what it does or doesn't provide in the way of assurances or protections in the future?
Certainly. The compliance agreement relates specifically to noise issues that have arisen with respect to the cement plant over the past few years. And the county is currently finalizing a compliance agreement with Lehi as it relates to the noise issues at the cement plant. The compliance agreement is an enforcement tool that is available to the county, and it allows county departments and agencies to forego litigation in exchange for a responsible parties agreement to cease or abate conditions that are violating the county ordinance code or state law that the county departments enforce. It's important to know that even if a responsible party enters into a compliance agreement, if they fail to comply with the conditions of the compliance agreement, the county reserves the right to enforce the agreement with litigation.
Thank you very much. Let me move on to county environmental health. And I guess I would preface this by saying that, you know, throughout this past year, my office continued to receive complaints from constituents about noise issues coming from the cement plant. So let me ask what environmental health has been able to do over the past year regarding noise, and what are the prospects for relief in the future?
Sure. So in 2017, the Department of Environmental Health continued to respond to complaints that we received regarding noise, and also maintain our compliance monitoring program, conducting site visits to take noise readings. In 2017, a majority of the complaints that we received occurred during the first quarter, from January to March. 75% of the complaints received occurred during that time period, for which 2 notices of violation were issued to Lehi, 1 issued in February, and the second notice of violation in 2017 would have been the 3rd NOV issued to Lehi, and that was issued in May 2017. As a result, we have been working closely with Lehi to ensure that mitigation measures are being taken, and they have been working on that. They've made structural changes, installing insulating blankets, sound suppressors, and also removing and replacing the fans, 32 fans. In the 3rd quarter of last year, we started working on the compliance agreement for...
Excuse the interruption. Could you go back to the fans? You moved past that pretty quickly, and I gather that's a matter of some import. So go back to the fans, please.
Yes. So the complaints we received on noise for Lehi started in 2015, and this was the result of the installation of a large fan to consolidate the operations there, and perhaps Bay Air Quality Management District could speak to that. It was to meet requirements for compliance on their emissions there. So when the
I apologize again, but I just want to sort of connect the dots here.
Yes.
So there was an effort to improve air quality, but the effort to improve air quality may have had some adverse noise impacts. Is that the connecting of the dots? Okay.
Correct.
All right. So sorry again for the interruption.
Certainly. So one of the mitigation measures that Lehi embarked on is to replace 32 fans to reduce the noise. And when we started working on the compliance agreement, they were still in progress for that work to be done, and they have since completed the replacement of those 32 fans. In 2017, Lehi conducted their sound surveys starting in May after the 3rd notice of violation, and they took readings. They had baseline readings taken in May, again in December after the fans were replaced, and last week additional readings were taken after the big fan was removed. So we received the results of the sound surveys with the noise readings that were conducted last night, and we reviewed those, and the numbers on the decibel readings have been reduced anywhere from 10% to 18%, looking at different values for noise readings.
And now I'm going to be the one that says, well, could we be a little more technical maybe, which is not usually what I'm asking. 10 to 18%, I know noise readings in decibels are not arithmetic. So when you say 10 to 18%, what does that really mean? If I'm one of the people in this room and I live in the affected area, what does that mean to me in terms of a noise reduction?
I am not the subject matter expert in our department, but I did consult with our subject matter expert who actually conducts the investigations there at the site. And if you're looking at strictly just the numerical values, these should mean a reduction in the noise that you're receiving at your residences.
Okay. Let me go to County Environmental Health with one last question, and then I want to get to the questions that we have from the public, because we have a stack of them. I heard the phrase hazardous materials referenced earlier, and as soon as I heard that phrase, I noticed that people's eyes light up a little bit, understandably. Could you tell us in a little bit more depth about how you regulate hazardous materials on site? So are there site visits? What are you looking for when you visit? And what happens if things aren't as they should be?
Sure. So our team performs inspections out at the Lehigh campus. As you know, it's a pretty large site. And we're there at a minimum once every year to inspect their underground storage tanks. They have a gas station on site. We also do a pretty comprehensive sort of survey and inspection of the entire campus as well. That inspection's coming due this coming August and September, and that's a pretty comprehensive inspection. We have almost 50 regulated activities that we're kind of looking at to compare against the requirements at 17 different buildings or areas. So we also do unannounced or complaint inspections at the site. When they are wanting to construct new hazardous material storage areas or close facilities, tanks, areas that had hazardous materials, we're also on site to do some inspections of those areas as well. We do some construction like plan checking as well as with the closures, making sure that they're planning to remove all the residues that may have been in contact with those facilities. So those are the types of inspections that we perform. When we're out there, we're trying to determine if the facility's in compliance with at least 7 different sets of environmental regulations. We're focused on prevention of the release of hazardous materials as well as mitigating the impacts if there is a release that occurs, and that's through preparedness. Things like pre-planning and training, making sure that they have emergency response equipment on site. So there's a whole bunch of different regulatory programs that we're looking at. Just to give you a few concrete examples of some of the things that we're looking at, like at a gas station, we're looking at the structural integrity of the tank and the secondary containment. These things are monitored by sensors. We're making sure that those sensors are functional, that they're speaking to a monitoring panel, and that when there is a leak or a release detected, that the system kind of shuts down or behaves appropriately. We look at chemical containers to make sure that they're labeled, they're in good shape, they're separated from things that are incompatible that might cause a hazardous reaction. So as you can tell, a little bit different than some of the other agencies that are here. We're looking at things that are more industrial in nature, things that are known to have a physical or health hazard associated with it, or hazardous waste that have a little bit, maybe a higher concentration of hazardous materials that are generated from industrial processes. We oftentimes will get complaints from folks who have those concerns about the naturally occurring elements that are being discharged either to the water, to the airway. But our authority often limits us to these things that have the higher concentrations. So those aren't things that we necessarily can speak to. Anytime that we're out there, we're leaving a notice of inspection that describes what we observed, all of the alleged violations, what they need to do to come back into compliance, as well as when they need to come back into compliance. And that time frame is usually around 30 days, and we expect a response back from them as to what they did to fix those violations. Or if they have some mitigating circumstance and can't get back into compliance within that time frame, that they give us a very detailed plan as to when they're going to get back into compliance. If for some reason there's a serious violation or sort of a pattern of neglect or disregard, that's when we go to our enforcement tools. And we do have some of those tools, but we reserve it when the informal enforcement is not working, the education and the informal pushing to get these issues resolved.
What's an enforcement tool?
An enforcement tool, examples of enforcement tools could be you could issue a citation. It could be an administrative enforcement order under the state's unified program. We could work with county council on a local ordinance through a consent agreement. So there are a lot of different enforcement tools that are available to us.
Under what circumstances, if any, would either the quarry or the cement plant be, quote, shut down?
We don't necessarily have the ability to shut down the plant. We have the ability to take enforcement through the mechanisms that I just described, which may be issuing fines and penalties. For like the gas station, I suppose we could provide a red tag that would kind of prevent the delivery of fuel. But that would take something that would either large release or a structural deficiency that's immediately compromising the environment.
Let me go to legal counsel again then, county counsel, and Ms. Bianca, if you can. Let me ask you the same question, which is, under what circumstances, if any, would either the cement plant or the quarry be shut down? And the reason I'm asking the question is, I get comments or questions from folks in the community from time to time. Well, I heard there was a violation over here, or I heard there was a violation over there. why hasn't the property been shut down? And I think the panel's done an admirable job tonight of explaining, well, here's how we respond to a specific kind of violation. But under what circumstances, if any, would either or both of these operations simply be shut down or precluded from further operation?
It would be a situation of ongoing egregious violations that are not abated. And prior to shutting down a facility, Lehigh would have due process rights for consideration, whether it be before a legislative body or before the court.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's helpful information for folks to have. And I also want to thank the panel for providing this sort of baseline of information before we go to further questions from members of the public. As I mentioned earlier, I've got a stack of cards, and thank you to the folks who have turned them in. We're going to try and cluster these by subject matter so we don't bounce around. That means all of a sudden it'll be your turn. So please hang in there. We have a question that reads as follows. How does the Bay Area Air Quality Management District measure benzene coming from Lehigh, and what controls are required for benzene?
Okay, I can answer that. So Lehigh has continuous emission monitors for a lot of pollutants. And also they are required to do annual source testing. Annual source testing is mainly done for the toxic air contaminant emissions. And as far as the benzene is concerned, before Lehigh installed the tall stack, which is about 296 feet tall stack, benzene used to be the risk driver for the facility. Benzene no longer is the risk driver after the installation of that stack.
All right. Further question, and it's really a request. It says, please set up a website where citizens can post pictures and report potential problems. Bay Area Air Quality Control District phone number does not work because problems are almost always after 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, so no one's there, and there is no feedback, and there's no record available to the public of repeated problems. Comments, thoughts?
So one thing to point out is, in addition to our phone number for contacting and complaint lines, is we also have an online complaint on our website. So if you go to our general website page, which is baaqmd.gov, there is the online complaint format, and that can be submitted at any point in time during the day. So if you're having difficulty reaching the district through the phone line, we can definitely look into that, because the phone line should be available at all times for calling in. But if it's a concern for getting information in, that's another avenue for doing that. And those complaints get logged in just like our phone call complaints. And they are logged in and they are followed up by inspection staff and investigated by inspection staff. So you will have contact by inspection staff, and then they will also follow up with the alleged facility. So in this case, if it's Lehigh, they will follow up with the alleged facility and gather information in relationship to that incident or the emission in question or odor in question.
Well, let me say thank you and for the offer to follow up on the phone line, and would appreciate that follow-up. And then I'm going to let you make that note, because that's an important note to make. And then I'm going to ask if you'd repeat the online web address one more time.
So it's just our general district website. So it's www.baaqmd.gov. And on our main page, there is a link at the base of the page to actually register an online complaint. So you can do it through there if you need to.
Thank you. And by the way, I should say on these next couple of cards here I have, when I asked if you would print clearly, which I appreciate so I can read your question accurately, I did not anticipate that people would already have printed out their questions and brought them to paste on the cards. But this is my district. I'm just pointing this out to the panel here. They're savvy. Neighbors of Lehi are regularly seeing emissions that are not coming from the central stack. What is their origin?
without seeing where they're coming from, it's hard to say personally right now. The origin can depend on the operation, what's occurring at the time. Again, that's a situation where if a complaint is lodged in relationship to that and an inspector goes out there, that's part of the investigation process, and we can see if there was any anomalies or issues that going on during that time that the emission was occurring that resulted in those emissions from a source other than the stack. Like I said, as currently not being able to see where the emissions are coming from on the plant or at the facility, I can't necessarily say why they're coming from that source, but there is potential that if there's an upset or if there's some sort of malfunction, that maybe there would be emissions, but that's part of our investigation process, and that's what we would identify at that time.
Thank you. What are the implications for Bay Area Air Quality Management District's Rule 1118 for Lehigh? And when will Lehigh be required to conform to the rule?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, 1118 is to reduce risk from existing facilities. And Lehigh is in phase 1 of the implementation plan of Rule 1118. Lehigh has made a lot of improvements over the years, like the tall stack for the protection of the public health. They also install a lot of abatement equipment, like for NOx abatement, the bag houses, lime slurry injection system. And what 1118 does is, under 1118, the facility-wide threshold is reducing from 100 in a million to 10 in a million. So the last time we did the health risk assessment for Lehigh, they were below 10 in a million threshold. Now we are projecting that that risk is going to go up because of the changes made by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. As I mentioned earlier, that even for the same level of emissions, the calculated risk will go up. So after we are done with the health risk assessment, which is going to be this year or early next year, Lehigh, if they're above 10 in a million threshold, they will have to come up with a risk reduction plan. The HRA will identify the significant risk drivers, the sources that are contributing to the overall facility-wide risk, and they will have to come back to the district with a risk reduction plan as to how they can reduce the risk to come below 10 in a million threshold.
All right. Next question, what exactly is the smoke we see? What's it composed of? And how is the air quality continuing to be monitored? So when people see what they just colloquially describe as smoke, the question is, what is it really? What's it composed of? And how is the air quality continuing to be monitored going forward?
Okay, we have heard, after the installation of the tall stack, people have seen a detached plume. This is a plume that forms, away from the stack. And we think that's related to condensable particulate matter. It's the PM2.5. And
would you say that again, please? We think it is comprised of what?
Of some particulate matter. It's not filterable, it's condensable. So it exits the stack in the form of a vapor, then it mixes with air to form condensable particulate matter. It changes to solids or liquid. And we are aware of it, and to address that issue, right now, for particulate matter PM2.5, there are only ambient air quality standards. It is not considered a toxic air contaminant. There is a possibility that if it is PM2.5, then there could be some toxic air contaminants also in that plume. And we are working with Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, which is a state agency, to come up with health effect values for PM2.5. So that's what the effort is.
Thank you. What do we know about the impact of truck traffic to and from Lehigh and the Stevens Creek Quarry? Truck traffic on air quality.
As far as the truck traffic is concerned, our district's jurisdiction is on stationary sources. The mobile sources, they are regulated by Air Resources Board. But when we do the 1118 health risk assessments, we'll be looking at mobile sources that operate within the facility.
All right. Here's a question. Why does the Air District not shut down Lehigh when there is a Spare the Air Day?
The simple answer is obviously we don't have the capability of shutting down the facility, even though it's a Spare the Air Day. So one thing we still will enforce is obviously all the applicable regulations, and provided that Lehigh is complying with those regulations, then there's no additional action that can be taken. But if any of the regulations are not complying with applicable regulations or conditions in their permit, they will be subject to any sort of applicable violation in those cases. But as it pertains to a Spare the Air Day itself, there's no restriction from Lehigh for shutting down during a Spare the Air Day.
Let me, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, so go with me on this.
I'm going with you.
Does the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, is that the district that is responsible for Spare the Air Days?
That's correct.
So when folks in the room couldn't have a fire in their fireplace on Christmas Eve or Christmas this year, because those happen to be bad days as I recall, that's because the district said it was a Spare the Air Day, and we couldn't have a fire in our fireplaces.
That's right.
And why is it then that if the folks who are here are regulated, Lehigh is not regulated by the same Bay Area Air Quality Management District with respect to a Spare the Air Day?
The primary reason is because Lehigh, in the case of it, unlike neighboring facilities and homes, Lehigh is held to a permit and limits and requirements under our regulations specifically. So they have specific limits and requirements for emissions, and they're required to monitor and maintain those emissions under those permits. So that's where we hold them accountable, is under the permit and the regulations. So that's there's a difference, there's a variation or difference between both the homes and the properties that do not have emission controls or potentially do not have any sort of monitoring, where Lehigh is a stationary source which has applicable regulations and a permit.
All right, thank you. I think that's a helpful clarification. I've got a number of additional questions here on air, but I'm going to put them on hold for just a minute. I will get back to as many as I possibly can, but I want to make sure in the time we have remaining that I get to other topics. So I'm going to go next to water, on which we have a number of cards as well. And these are more air. Okay, thank you. And I should say at this point, and we have a lot of questions still coming in, some of you will recall from previous meetings, if we don't get to your question tonight, we keep the question, we forward it to the responsible jurisdiction, we ask them to answer the question, and then we post the answer to the question on our website, my website. And I thank Christina Loquist, who helps me with that process, because it is a relatively big burden to make sure. But I want everyone to know, when you walk out of the room tonight, whether we got to your question in time to make it to 9 o'clock, we will get you an answer to your question if it is humanly possible, and it will be posted as a matter of public record. So thank you. All right, Water Board. Is there any regulation and treatment process for mercury in the water? Let's talk about mercury.
Yes. If Lehigh were a producer of mercury or doing an activity that would generate mercury that was discharging off their site, then they would be subject to the same types of permits that they have in place right now related to regulating selenium. And I will share now too, there is a nickel issue there, but it's more minor than selenium, and it is also being controlled right now.
And should people infer from the answer you gave that there isn't a mercury issue?
That's correct.
Okay. Next question. The water that is used for backwash, is it from watershed or is it imported water?
As I understand it, the quarry water uses rising groundwater, and then they have a system of reclaimed water that they bring in to use for the facilities, toilets, and that sort of thing. So processed water, what people are calling backwash, goes to storage areas, but it's not, it's piped in. I mean, they purchase it. Lehi purchases it.
Can I ask you to hold that thought? So the question was piped in or trucked in?
Yeah, oh, it's piped in.
Okay. Next question is, in Reclamation Plan, overburden is to be placed into the quarry pit, but all toxins now leaching out to creek will then go straight to drinking water aquifers. Will this be modified?
So I think when the question says reclamation plan, I think they mean the SMARA plan that was approved by the Board of Supervisors, and that's correct. The two large storage areas are intended to be either capped with vegetative material or used to backfill the quarry over the period of time as Christopher described. We're actually, the Water Board is studying those storage areas to determine any dangers coming from the materials contained in that storage area, and we're working on a report of waste discharge for the material storage area so we can make sure to monitor and deal with that. So it's in terms of when it says those areas will affect groundwater, one, groundwater is at a depth because of the quarry and all of the mining activities, and then two, when the material is placed into the quarry, there won't be contact with surfacing groundwater. But two, we're also looking at the storage areas to make sure that those materials are safe and not coming into contact with any water that could ultimately get to a groundwater source.
And I heard you reference a report on...
Yeah, so we have something, one of our staff people is working on a report of waste discharge related to the east and west material storage areas. So it's not a report in the sense that like someone studies something. It's basically saying, is this a permit needed for the area?
And the timing on that is?
I think it's this year.
Within a couple months for the Water Board to receive the completed report of waste discharge. And then, sorry, I was going to finish and say a couple months after that, so approximately June, July, for the Water Board to consider issuing a permit.
I apologize again. And that's a public document, is it?
Everything Lehi submits to us is a public document, and that permit will control in the years interceding from now until, I mean, SMARA applies, but the activities of taking the storage areas and placing them in the quarry isn't expected for a number of years.
Okay. And if people wanted a copy of that report?
Lindsay's working on something new.
And if people wanted a copy of that report, the easiest way for them to get it would be?
The San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board has a website, and they actually have a Lehi page, or they used to. And on the Lehi page, if you look for report of waste discharge, or if you search for the term EMSA or WMSA, which stand for East and West Material Storage Areas, you should be able to find it.
All right. I have a question that says, are the concentrations in selenium and other toxins in Permanente Creek being controlled to federal clean water standards by the final treatment system?
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Question for Joe Simitian. When does he expect Lehi, the he being me, I believe, when does he expect Lehi to apply for permission to open a second pit mine? What will the timeline and process for consideration be once the application is submitted? We covered some of this earlier, and I think, as I indicated earlier, at one point we thought we were headed towards an application that was in the vested area. Then at another point, we thought we were headed toward an application that was in the not vested area. And the most recent communication from Lehi to me directly is that the matter is under consideration. So I think that means we don't know. Okay, that's as good an answer as I can give you, because that's not a decision that we make. Obviously, that's a decision that ultimately is controlled by Lehi. All right. What regulatory monitoring and control is included in the treatment plant permit in regards to temperature of outfall water in relation to receiving water temperature at Permanente?
I don't know what the exact temperature requirement is, but when they're talking about the final treatment system permit, what they're actually referencing is the facility NPDES permit. That's a federal permit, and the program is implemented by the state. And the permit for Lehi requires them to meet both state and federal standards in terms of selenium and temperature, so that no other things are affected, including the environment or other chemical constituents. So we use state standards such as MCLs, which are maximum contaminant levels, as ceilings, and they can't go above it. And so temperature is one of those, but I don't know the number for temperature.
But there is a regulation that controls
Yes.
temperature, to be clear. Thank you. Will Permanente Creek stream flow still smell and taste as historically it has in the watershed to attract and sustain native trout fish run after treatment by the water something plant?
So I don't know the taste and smell of the stream, and I don't know how a trout feels about it. But I do know that the Sierra Club lawsuit, one of its main goals was to protect stream continuity for fish, for a number of different kinds of fish, and also to protect habitat of other wildlife, such as frogs at the site. So to the extent that the treatment system is resulting in cleaner water, I'm hoping that the fish haven't adapted to dirty water, but it's going to historical better background levels.
All right. Is this one we could follow up with you on, just out of curiosity? All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this one for follow-up, because I think the question gets to an issue, which is once the water is returned, does it in some way disrupt the habitat in a way that makes the habitat no longer viable for...
yeah, and that question, I don't want to get away from the taste and smell of the water, but the question may be answered too by the restoration plans, which are all public documents that will be considered this year. In terms of, there's a 70% complete plan. It removes certain cement barriers within the creek and establishes that continuity for fish. So all of that's public, and we can absolutely provide that in one of our written follow-ups.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to keep that in the list then. Thank you. I've got a number of questions that actually are comments, but I'm going to try and cut to the chase and get to the question that follows the comments. Here's one that says, what will the treatment plant be treating? I understand it will not be treating the water that is polluted down to zero pollution. Why is that? The concern is that the questioner says, I understand it will not be treating the water that is polluted down to a zero pollution level. Why is that?
So if the question, I hear sort of two questions in there, and Lisa can jump in if I'm misunderstanding. The first question I hear is, what water is it treating at the plant? And in terms of the permit and what outfalls exist at the plant, it deals with both processing and also stormwater. So everything coming off the site should be treated. And then in terms of what does it treat down to, there are federal and state requirements, like I mentioned, of these MCLs, the maximum contaminant levels. And for selenium, I believe that the level is 10. So we often say they have to go to a certain standard. So to the extent that 10 isn't a 0, but 10 is a level of non-detect that no human or aquatic impacts can be felt, that's the standard that we regulate to.
All right. And again, I'm going to struggle a little with some of the handwriting here. And again, the assertions from folks may or may not be accurate. I'm just trying to read the questions into the record here. Santa Clara Valley Water District sells water to the San Jose Water and California Water Company. They are not an enforcement agency. Something about the water board should oversee the water board should oversee the Santa Clara Valley Water District to make sure they are honest. And I did not hear that what was happening at the Stevens Creek Reservoir, which goes into the Stevens Creek Reservoir on the Permanente Creek, is polluted and nothing is being done. Why not? I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a run-on question, but...
Well, that's a lengthy question. So let's talk about first, why doesn't the water board police us? The water board does police us. We have several TMDLs and 303 delistings which are basically directives from the Water Board.
And excuse me, but a TMDL for everybody is?
Total maximum daily load. So it's a directive of what a daily load of a certain chemical could be discharged. So for instance, we have some mercury and methylmercury things we're working on in the reservoirs. We have trash issues, we have diazonon issues. So the Water Board does police us. But the other side is they are our partner. So when we see issues that we're concerned about, whether it's temperature or pollution, we ask them to help us out. So then as far as the groundwater goes, the groundwater is recharged or the groundwater is naturally recharged in a wide region. And then when San Jose Water Company or California Water Company or one of the cities that is the water supplier, they need to meet the federal requirements for drinking water. So just because there's groundwater and they pump it out of the ground from a couple hundred feet doesn't mean that it goes straight to the tap. So the water companies are responsible, again, for that water to meet federal drinking water requirements.
All right.
May I add something,
Please?
For clarification? So we're the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. We are part of the State Water Resources Control Board, which has headquarters in Sacramento and spans jurisdiction over the entire state. A very important function that the State Water Resources Control Board the State Water Board serves for all the regions and all of the people who drink water in California is to regulate, in this case, the San Jose Water Company for safe drinking water. That function is not handled by the regional board offices, but it is part of our agency's jurisdiction. We are the state agency responsible for that.
All right. Please.
So this question has come up a few times at the agency. So Permanente Creek, Lehigh Cement discharges to Permanente Creek, which flows north. And there is a diversion where the water from Permanente Creek can be discharged to Stevens Creek around Fremont Avenue in Los Altos / Sunnyvale or Cupertino. The water from Stevens Creek Reservoir's watershed and Stevens Creek is not connected to Lehigh. So those are completely separate sub-watersheds.
Thank you very much. Please, no comments tonight. We're trying to get through as much as quickly as we can. And let me jump to the issue of noise. And again, we have some unasked questions about water. They go in the pile. If we have time, which I'm doubtful of at this point, we'll come back to them. But I want to get to the other topics. Noise. The questioner says, the San Jose Airport and Laguna Seca Racetrack are examples of facilities that can continuously measure and record sound levels. Could this be required of Lehi, continuous measurements?
As part of the compliance agreement that we have been working on with Lehi, there should be some monitoring that will be done concurrently and jointly with our department. So the details I may not be able to get into, but that is covered in the compliance agreement that we're working on.
Okay, thank you. Night noise. The questioner notes, how and when is noise level determined? Percentage reduction in log units, I believe they mean logarithmic units, may not relate to percentage physiologic noise reduction, and then says, can I volunteer to host a night measuring unit? Let's talk a little bit about how the noise level is determined and what about nighttime in particular?
So the ordinance lists the requirements that should be met in the unincorporated areas for noise levels. There is a reduction.
And let me just interrupt for a minute. That would be the county's noise ordinance that we're talking about that applies to the property because it's in the unincorporated area of Santa Clara County, yes?
That is correct.
And in years past, people have said, well, is the county's standard weaker than the surrounding jurisdictions? And the answer to that question is?
We have actually reviewed some documents, including some by different cities in the county, and it turns out that the levels for the county are more stringent than other cities within the county.
And Can you talk a little bit more about the measuring, and particularly at night, please? How do we measure? How often do we measure? What about the nighttime?
So we have staff that I said earlier respond to complaints. So when we receive a complaint, we call the complainant and we make arrangements to go on site on the property to take those readings. Along with that, we have regular compliance monitoring that we embark in, and staff goes out even when there is no complaint to take readings at neutral locations, not related to any complaints. So when staff go out, they take continuous readings for a period of 1 hour, and those are recorded and they're posted on the planning website.
Okay. When will the study of Lehigh noise be concluded?
They have done a study, and like I mentioned, we received the results last night from the readings that they took in May 2017, again in December, and just last week.
And if people here wanted to get a copy of that study, how might they do so?
Results of investigations of complaints and also any correspondence between the county and Lehigh are posted every quarter on the planning website.
And when will that next quarter time be?
After March, so in April.
Okay, so January, February, March, meaning the first quarter of this year, and once that's done, they'll be posted.
That is correct.
Okay. If somebody were to ask for them specifically and directly, would we just hand them to them now?
Yes.
Okay. Not that I was leading you anywhere, but just wanted to know. Okay. Thank you. What specific measures have been taken by Lehigh to reduce noise? Are additional measures planned? Some of this you've spoken to earlier, but I think if we just go back and say, all right, so looking back over the last few years, what has Lehigh done to date that is now in place to reduce noise? And what, if anything, remains that is planned to be done?
So they have taken several measures to reduce the noise. They've installed acoustic blankets, sound suppressors. They've also implemented process changes in terms, some things that are really simple, just closing the door to the compressor room to reduce the noise. And also the biggest mitigation measure that they've taken is the replacement of the 32 fans and the removal of the large fan.
Okay. And again, going forward, anything else in the works that we want to share with people tonight?
At this point, what we'll be working on is the routine, regular monitoring, but agreed upon locations.
Okay. And that's part of this compliance agreement going forward?
Correct. And we're hoping that we will get fewer complaints moving forward. The complaints have reduced from 2016 to 2017. In 2016, we had 32 complaints. In 2017, we had 24 complaints. Like I mentioned earlier, we issued 2 notices of violation in 2017. And after the second notice of violation in 2017, the complaints have been reduced significantly. The last complaint we received was from November.
And when that compliance agreement document is finally done and agreed to, it too will be a public document?
Correct.
And it will be available on the website?
Correct.
Thank you. Question is, any plans for continuous noise monitoring? We've talked about that. Second part of the question, data from the most recent measurements. We've talked about the fact that the study's there and it's going to be posted in early April as part of a regular quarterly report, but if somebody asked for it specifically between now and then, it's a public document, we would make it available to them. And then question number 3 in the same card, I believe it's what numbers is Lehigh committing to? World Health Organization and EPA recommend 35 dBA, decibels, A-weighted decibels, at night time levels. So I guess the question is there a number that people can hang their hat on going forward?
The noise ordinance requires that the levels of noise be 40 or below 40, 40 and below.
40. Which at the risk of stating the obvious is more than 35, which is what the questioner is asking. Okay, thank you very much. And let me go on to some questions for the planning staff because I don't want them to feel neglected. What would the steps and time frame be like if Lehigh wishes to open a new pit mine? So just if we were to get that application, let's say tomorrow somebody walked in the door and said, hi, we're from Lehigh, here's our application, we'd like to open a new pit. Can you walk us through what the process and the time frame would look like? We covered this a little bit earlier, but let's just walk it through as if it were a real thing tomorrow afternoon.
We are open We are open tomorrow, too.
Good.
It would, as articulated earlier, it would, based on, a lot of it will be based on where the pit is proposed. As described earlier by County Counsel and Supervisor Simitian, there are parts of the lands owned by Lehigh that are determined vested, for which a new mine would not require a use permit from the county, which is more of a permissive request. If a mine was proposed in those areas, Lehigh would be required to submit a reclamation plan. If Lehigh is proposing a new mine in an area which is not vested, it requires both the reclamation plan and the use permit. So the nature of the application will be determined on if and where the pit is proposed. Our first step is what's called a pre-application. We like our applicants to get a wide picture of the permits that are required, the standards, what will be looked at, the scope of environmental review. So the first formal step for us would be to, if Lehigh intends to move forward, they would have to submit plans in the forms of a pre-application. We'd submit those to partner agencies, environmental health, probably partner wildlife agencies to review, give feedback to Lehi on what are the standards and what are the issues that would be dealt with. Once that's done, that's not a public process, that's an internal review process where subject matter experts and departments provide feedback to Lehi. We provide a letter that gives them feedback. That letter to Lehi is a public document. And so if there's knowledge to us and the public that they're going through the pre-app, we have these meetings, we provide this feedback, that letter to Lehi could be made available. The next step is then to apply for the permits necessary. So again, that would be the reclamation plan or the use permit. It would be processed by county staff. Would require environmental review. It would likely, although we look at the situation, require an environmental impact report. Most folks are probably familiar with large, lengthy reports that entail a lot of public review. Ultimately, both of those permit applications require approval by the County Planning Commission. They'd be the decision-making authority. Upon appeal, it would go to the Board of Supervisors.
So, on a time frame basis, again, understanding the difference between the two different vested and non-vested, if somebody were to walk in tomorrow and start this process, is this a process that gets to the Planning Commission for a decision, say, in a year? More? Less?
Yeah, I'll give you a highly qualified answer. Typically, a proposal for a new pit or quarry would take over a year. Okay.
And could it take as long as 2 years if it was appealed all the way to the Board of Supervisors?
It could.
It could, yeah. Okay. Let me go on to, I know we have some wildlife questions. I still have some planning department questions, but I want to get to the wildlife questions in particular. And then I have some that are categorized as miscellaneous. All right. And thank you to all of you who are here tonight, and thank you to the county staff. I should have asked earlier, we have some other folks from the county who are here. Could you raise your hands and just let people know that you're here? Okay, so just so you know that folks are here and listening and tracking the information and the answers to your questions. How will the pumps be screened and managed so that juvenile and/or adult red-legged frogs will not be drawn into the water treatment plant?
So DFW, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, isn't here, and so I don't want to speak for their regulatory program. But in terms of the the final treatment system, the pumps are fully contained.
Fully contained means what?
There's no outside area. It looks like a capsule. There's nowhere for a frog to get into the pump. Okay. But to the extent that DFW regulates the red-legged frog, both the habitat and the take, if any were injured or even observed, as they have been in the past, they're counted and protected as opposed to disregarded. So.
All right, and I have the other question I have under wildlife is in fact about the red-legged frog. Anything else anyone wants to share about the red-legged frog protections?
The only thing we know is that, and I think it's come up a couple of times, is that the restoration project involves creek habitat and some off-creek habitat that has proven to be very a perfect environment for red-legged frog, and so they've been discovered. And so in the planning stages, that is something that has come up and that we've made sure to sort of plan around. So the public documents related to the creek improvements detail sort of red-legged frog updates.
Thank you. I've got, under miscellaneous, here are some questions, and we're going to try and do these as a lightning round, looking at the clock. Is Lehigh's violation list available to the public? So if there are violations that have occurred over the past year or two, is that available to the public? And if so, how would they access it?
I would say that each agency may have their own violation, and there's not one place that they're all gathered. So I would say that they're spread out. For example, we have the noise violations, and we have any other violations with water quality, and there's not one central point that they're gathered.
Is that information shared at the twice annual meetings that you've been having these past few years?
We do discuss in the interagency meeting with each other the goings-ons at Lehigh, and we make sure that we're all on the same page and we know what violations are on the table.
That leads nicely to the next question. Have any of the agencies present issued any violations against Lehigh in the past 12 months? And if so, for what? Anything in the past 12 months? Let's start with this end of the table.
So the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has issued 2 violations to Lehigh within the past 12 months, and both for visible emissions from the main stack, and those were visible emissions recorded by our inspection staff from the main stack and observed.
So the Water Board has, we entered into a stipulated order, which is basically a settlement agreement between the parties, and then it was approved by the regional board for water code violations arising out of the operational year 2016. And then we assessed violations for the period from January 1 to October 1, 2017. And we used that date specifically because that was when the final treatment system became operational. So we are currently in settlement negotiations for the 2017 violations that I expect will be put forth in a settlement agreement and ultimately considered by the board.
Thank you. Going down the panel table. Santa Clara Valley Water District is going to say that's not our department, I believe. All right, then we're going to get to the county.
No violations issued by county planning.
Within the last year.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the last question, or excuse me, the next question is, what's the plan for the storage of materials for water treatment chemicals? How will that plan be enforced? So there are water treatment chemicals at the site, presumably, and the question is, what's the plan for the storage of those materials, those chemicals, and how will that plan be enforced?
I don't know, I don't recall specifically how Lehigh stores its chemicals, but our stormwater protection permit has requirements for things to be contained, and as well as berms and other sort of redundant protective measures to be installed around any storage area of chemicals, so that if there were to be a spill of some sort and the chemicals were to be exposed and water fell on them, they would not be discharged off the site or away from where they are currently stored. So there's currently that aspect of Lehigh's requirements are that they're in compliance in the way they're managing their stored chemicals.
Anyone else on this?
Yeah, so the local hazardous material storage ordinance would also come into play here. So we have reviewed and approved plans for the treatment system, and the local ordinance requires that the containment be compatible with the materials and that there be both primary and secondary containment of those chemicals should the primary rupture. And so those materials should be contained if there's an issue with the containers.
Okay. Next question. Is it true that Lehigh could not operate legally in Germany, home of Lehigh's parent, due to stricter environmental rules in that country? No
I'm not sure we would want to speculate
I don't
on.
know. We don't know that one.
All right. This one says there was recently an accidental death at Lehigh Quarry. What is the county and others doing to prevent this from happening again?
I know that there's an ongoing investigation with MSHA, which is the Mining Safety, I don't know the acronym actually, but it's like OSHA, but it's for mines. And they're doing an investigation. They'll come out with a report. It usually takes at least a year, around a year, to have that report finished. And the county, we do have monthly inspections at the quarry to make sure that everything as far as the slopes are safe from stormwater standard for erosion, and to see if there's any egregious issues with slopes, which we haven't seen. Other than that, it's really part of the federal MSHA group that looks after that.
All right. Next question is about hazardous material. Has the dust along the truck route from Lehigh to 280 been checked for hazardous materials?
That wouldn't be a hazardous material that we would regulate. And we typically don't do testing of residues. If there is a hazardous waste that they're generating on site and we need to confirm that it meets the definition of a hazardous waste, we might do some sampling on site, but that would fall out of our purview.
Well, then let's ask the next question, which isn't on the card, but I'll ask, which is, whose purview would that be in?
I'm not sure that we know exactly where the dust is coming from, whether it's coming off of vehicles, whether they're fugitive emissions, so I don't know if Bay Area Air Quality would want to weigh in on that.
Well, there could be fugitive dust coming from bag houses, from some storage piles that are not covered. And we do make estimates, and as far as the risk drivers for Lehi are concerned, we suspect that fugitive emissions from storage piles, roadways, and bag houses are the significant risk drivers at this time.
All right. I'm going to mark that question for follow-up and ask my staff to work to see if we can get a little more information. I think the question, again, is there are trucks that carry product up and down the route from, or materials, up and down the route from Lehigh to 280. And the question is, has the dust in that area been checked to see if there is any hazardous materials that might be linked to either the materials or the product that moves back and forth? So again, I'm going to ask my staff to help us follow up on that when we go to the questions at the at our website. We are just at 3 minutes to 9, so I want to try and wrap things up in a timely fashion. We did have a substantial number of questions that we couldn't get to, but we did cover at least all of the topic areas, I believe we did, and I think we covered a lot of ground. So first I want to ask you to join me in thanking the panelists who have joined us tonight to be here to more fully explain just what is happening and how their agencies provide oversight. So my thanks to you all. And again, a thank you to the City of Cupertino, not only for the venue and for ensuring that we're filmed and streamed, but also for the refreshments, which were quite popular out front, but which I cannot take any credit for at all. Our thanks to the city for that. We hold these meetings here. I'm going to ask for a quick show of hands. I think I know the answer, but I don't want to presume or assume. I've asked before. We hold these meetings here because we hope that it will be more convenient than if we held them at the County Government Center at 70 West Heading Street in San Jose. A show of hands quickly. Those who would prefer that we continue to hold them here rather than at the County Government Center? Okay. Other than the county staff, anybody think we should be at 70 West? Okay, no, we're right. I think we got a pretty clear sense of that. Thank you. It really is helpful to know that it matters to people where we hold them and when we hold them and so on. And again, a thank you to our panelists. And finally, a thank you to all of you for showing up tonight to hear about the current state of affairs, to raise these questions. We will get the remaining questions to the appropriate agencies and departments, and we will, once we have answers, get them posted on the website. So please stay tuned. Can't give you a guarantee as to how long that process will take, because it depends, obviously, on how long it takes for folks who have the expertise to get back to us all. And finally, I just want to say I have found these hearings, this is our third, as I said, these meetings very productive in terms of my office and my own personal understanding of both what's going on and also what the folks that I represent care about and what the concerns are out in the community. Please feel free to shoot us an email and let us know what you find helpful, what you think we might do better. And if you think there are changes in format or the way we approach the task, I want to be open to hearing from you all. And yes, that would be at supervisor.simitian to put myself up to the same standards. It is 9 o'clock sharp. Thank you all again for being here. Appreciate your presence. Good night. Have a good evening.